Started. All right, so everyone, welcome to the August meeting 2025 at the Colorado Hydrogen Network. We're going to have just a 1 hour meeting this time. We've got a fairly short amount of information to talk about. One of the things is a tutorial I'm going to give, but I'd like to start out by talking about some coming events, and you might have just heard Bill Eady talking about one that's coming up in Seattle. So let me go ahead and get started. The next meeting is actually going to be a week later than usual. Normally, we meet on the third Tuesday, and that month it's going to be on the fourth Tuesday because I'm going to be at an event called Drilling for Hydrogen, and I'll talk to that a little bit more. But just so you all know, I'll be sending out the meeting notice to that right away, but that's going to be a little later than normal. So we do have an interesting meeting in September. We're going to talk about the Drilling for Hydrogen conference. I'll give you a debrief on that. And then I've asked Brendan Donor of Breathe Transport to talk about his Toyota Mirai fuel cell electric vehicle that he will be renting on Turo. And also the folks from Electric Green, that's Jane and Chris Allo, are going to talk about the hydrogen fueler that's going to be providing the hydrogen for that car. So um, those of us in the Denver area, at least, will have an opportunity to actually go out and try a hydrogen vehicle if you like by renting that. So I think that's going to be a real interesting meeting, and that'll be a full hour-and-a-half meeting in September. All right, so coming events. I already mentioned there's this event called Drilling for Hydrogen. It's happening September 15th and 16th down in Houston. And they bill this as a premier forum for exploration and production of geologic hydrogen. And I'm going to be there. I'm going to be on a panel. But the event itself it's going to feature things that you'd normally expect at a trade show kind of event with um, talks and panels and things like that. So they'll talk about the economic outlook and some market trends, look at some of the emerging technologies in natural hydrogen. I saw that Hytera just made another announcement about the production of their latest well that they've drilled. Um, Talk a bit about the geology and the geophysics and trying to characterize the reservoirs. So obviously that's technical things that is of interest to geologists and those actually doing the exploring for the hydrogen. And talk too about partnerships for infrastructure and trying to develop this whole market for this natural hydrogen. Also talk a little bit about regulatory updates and production and transport. So as I said, I'll be on a panel. I was invited and submitted my ideas to talk a little bit about some of the business aspects. And I really see geologic hydrogen as being the key and most important source of clean hydrogen in the energy transition. So really excited that I'll be down there for that. All right, another event that's coming up, and this one is actually by invitation only. So, sorry, you can't sign up for this, but this is the second year that SARAD Enterprise Partners, or SEP as they call themselves up in Boulder, is holding this what they call the Hydrogen Mountain Retreat, and it will feature uh, some of the companies you see here. Now, these are the 2024 invitees, and I highlighted some of these in bold. I know last year I was there and I got a chance to sit down with Honda to talk to them about bringing vehicles out here. Our friend C0 up in Fort Collins will be there. Um, Coloma, who's doing natural hydrogen exploration. Gold H2, they are using microbes to generate hydrogen out of existing petroleum deposits. University of Colorado, I hope and I expect that they may have somebody from the Geological Survey there as well. I don't know that for a fact, though. And then down here at the bottom, you see a company called Vern. Well, they have a system for doing cryogenic compressed hydrogen. And when I first heard about that, I thought, well, wait, that's kind of strange. Hydrogen's a liquid. Aren't liquids incompressible? Well, it turns out liquid hydrogen is compressible a little bit, but it also what it does is it raises the boiling point quite a bit. I mean, you think about we here in Colorado are very familiar with the fact that water boils at a much lower temperature than it does down at sea level. And so it's that same kind of effect. So the boil off of liquid hydrogen isn't as great when you cryocompress it. So anyway, that's going to be a very interesting event. I'm just really pleased that I've been invited to attend again. I'll be looking to any of the companies there to do podcasts. We'll probably do an overall podcast for the event. So exciting that we've got this right in our backyard. All right, coming events. And Bill, I think this is the one you mentioned. Oh, you said October in Seattle. I don't know, Bill, in further reflection, do you think this is the event you were thinking of? I don't know, Bill, you're still on mute. There you go.
We don't see your slides. We only see
Oh
you.
my gosh. Um,
I
I
see
know.
him.
John, you see him?
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah, I
do.
can see your slides.
Okay, all right. Geez, Bill, don't scare me like that. Well, Bill, I'm not sure what the problem is you're having, but this event, there's this RE Plus has a number of events. They've got um, I think it's mostly about solar and electricity coming up in I wanted to say Las Vegas, but that's not right. But this particular event is focusing on hydrogen. And well, you can see here, engage with leaders and discuss the development of hydrogen hubs. And so this is really focused more, I think, toward the hydrogen hub um, people and the programs and the initiatives that they've got. But they are talking about trying to build the global economy. Um, Here we have, the hubs, the status growth, national strategy, talking about fuels for maritime and aviation, which I think is really important, and also building a workforce, um, microgrids and grids and so forth. Now, I have a request into them to get a nonprofit rate on this. I'm considering possibly going out to Seattle. Now, when I go to these, I've got to pay this out of my own pocket, so got to be a little judicious with some of these that I attend. But stand by. I don't know for sure I'm going to go to this, but it certainly would be an important place for me to go to try to network and meet with some of these folks. Uh, if you are interested, I think the early bird rate is $695 to attend, and that's good until October 3rd. All right, the other events, and I've talked to these two before, the Hydrogen Technology Expo in Germany. Obviously, that's a bit of a trip for all of us, but if you had thought about a trip to Germany anyway, you might want to try to time it to be able to take that one in. And then the Flying High Conference, much more accessible. This is going to be online. I believe the cost is just $30. I'm signed up for that. And that's just a few hours coming up November 5th. Okay, so let us switch gears. I wanted to talk a little bit about data centers and some things around that. And I was trying to find a scary font here. I picked this particular font for data centers because I think they're I don't know if scary is the right word, but I think there are some possible things that can give us all pause. I think there's some caveats, some warnings and things about this, and I'll talk to some of those ideas. But anyway, that's why the scary font there. Get you all ready for Halloween. So data centers. Well, what's driving this? We've all seen the rapid emergence of artificial intelligence, and this does take some specialized hardware and, of course, a lot of other computing power. So that's driving the need for the data centers. Um, Also, artificial intelligence requires a lot of data to train on, and I'm going to talk to that a little bit, why that is. And so that drives this hunger for data and the need for these data centers. So as it turns out, companies like Google and Amazon and others are just collecting every bit of data that they possibly can. And it almost seems strange the stuff they're collecting. For example, the Roomba autonomous robot, they're collecting floor plans of people's homes and apartments and things. Nest thermostat, they're gathering things. And then, of course, almost anything we touch online gets gathered. And they're doing that so that in the future they can maybe sell that data or mine it for information. Cryptocurrency, we've all heard about that, and that requires an awful lot of computing power for the trading and things that they do. I don't pretend to understand that. I've looked at it, and it's still, um, I don't know if that makes sense to me, but anyway, that is one of the things that's driving these data centers. And then also, of course, cloud storage. I know most of us probably store our information online, so it's not so volatile if our computers get broken or stolen or something. And obviously, you need data centers to store all that information. All right, so let's talk a little bit about really what artificial intelligence is. And I don't claim to be an expert here. Some of you may be more of an expert than I am, but basically, it's in the most general terms, the ability of machines to perform tasks that normally require some kind of human intelligence. So things like learning and reasoning and problem solving, perception that involves graphics and pictures, and of course language understanding. I'm continually amazed at how good the voice to text and other things have gotten. It's just incredible the amount of improvement that's happened in the last few decades. So also data analysis and pattern recognition. I mean, not only in images, but also just looking for patterns in data, making decisions. And the other characteristic about artificial intelligence is the way it's put together is that it's usually improves over time with the experience and learning. So, types of artificial intelligence. Well, there's a number of types. So, deep learning, this uses something called artificial neural networks, and that's hardware based in a lot of cases. And it has multiple layers to analyze really complex data. I mean, beyond really what even humans could do and look for patterns. Um, AI agents or agentic AI, these are things that can operate autonomously. So here's more of the kind of scary part to some of this starts coming in. They can perceive their environment, make decisions, and take actions. So I think there's a lot of concern with people out there that could some of these things run amok at some point. So generative AI, some of us have probably dabbled in this. This is where you can create new content, things like text or images and audio. Um, some pretty impressive results from some of those, but I've seen some pretty bogus things come out of those as well. So again, a little bit of caution and care, I think, is involved. So narrow AI or weak AI, these are AI systems designed to perform specific tasks. Things like, well, here's an example here, playing chess, but those are the one of the types of AI. And then machine learning, which I'm going to go into a little bit deeper here. And this is basically creating software that can kind of program itself to improve performance without necessarily having an explicit algorithm or something that's following. All right, so a little bit more about machine learning. Well, this enables computer systems to basically learn from data without explicitly programming them to do that. I've been around a long time, and when I was dabbling in any kind of computer programming, you were setting up an algorithm that the software would follow. But these newer systems can actually take data and learn from it and program from it. So these are things like analysis and identifying patterns and making predictions or decisions. So obviously this would be useful in image recognition, finding patterns in pictures, natural language processing. Well, there's the voice to text and other forms of using language, and of course fraud detection. And so these models can adapt to new data and they can improve their performance over time. I thought it was interesting when the head of um, Facebook, I'm drawing a blank, Zuckerberg, was in front of Congress. Congress asked him, they said, well, um, how do these algorithms work? How does Facebook work? And he said, well, I really don't know. I can't answer that. And he wasn't just trying to evade the question. These uh, systems and these algorithms that they set up are designed to kind of program themselves. And that's a little scary because if they're out there trying to convince you to buy something, then they're going to optimize the system and optimize the software to do that, maybe without regard to whether there's any drawbacks to that. And there's where I think the scary part of some of this comes in. All right, so some of this is supervised learning where you take data and you tell the computer, well, here's what the correct output is, and now go kind of learn from that. But there's also unsupervised learnings where algorithms can learn from the data, discover patterns and structures, and kind of go off on their own. Reinforced learning, algorithms learn through trial and error and interact with the environment. And then there's feedback, so they know when they've done what they're supposed to do, whether it's good or bad, I suppose. All right, so am drawing a lot of this from this book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. It's kind of a long book. I think it's over 400 pages, but this will really open your eyes as to what's going on. You know, George Orwell talked about Big Brother and he tagged it as the government, but frankly, it's the corporations that are Big Brother. And they're out there not only just trying to learn and do things, but they're actually trying to control people's behavior. And
Hello.
yeah,
Hi. How you doing, sir? Good. I'm looking for 2x4, which is pressure
Masood,
treated.
let me
One.
hang on a second.
Pressure treated
Let
2x4.
me mute everybody here. Sorry.
All 18.
I
Um, I can't get this to open. I'm sorry. Hang on a second. Here I are. Okay. I'm gonna mute everybody. So um, if you would like to speak, please break in, unmute yourself, and jump in. Sorry, I normally mute everybody before we get started, so sorry about that. But at any rate, very important book, and I highly recommend you all pick it up and at least scan it, maybe read some of the sections that are more interesting to you. All right, so let's get on to talking about power for data center, which is more in the line of what us who are interested in hydrogen and so forth and clean energy are interested in. So, um, what do these things take? Well, the small data center, 1 to 5 megawatts, okay, no big deal. Medium, 10 to 70, okay, now we're starting to get serious. But large or hyperscale can be in the neighborhood of 20 to even 250 megawatts. And so, for comparison, I took a look, the Rawhide Energy Station just north of Fort Collins. Each of their generators is about 75 megawatts, and the total Rawhide 1 facility is 280 megawatts. So, for these data centers, we're basically talking about another power plant. And then, of course, you've got to have transmission lines to get it there. So, I'm going to talk a little bit more about maybe alternative ways to do that and what some of these issues are with those the large amount of power. But the big companies that are building data centers, well, Amazon, you'd expect that, and of course, Microsoft and Google. But here was one I hadn't actually heard about before called Equinix. And they apparently own and operate a lot of data centers worldwide. And then here's a real surprising one, Digital Realty. And I had to do a double take when I saw that. I thought it was digital reality. Well, no, it's digital realty, as in real estate investment trusts or REITs. So they own, acquire, and develop and manage data centers globally. So a little surprising what some of the big names are in that. So we're in the Rocky Mountain area, kind of interested to see if we hit the top 10, and we don't. But here's the top 10 data center locations. Northern Virginia, apparently that's number one. Phoenix, another alternative. Silicon Valley, well, you'd expect that, right? Dallas, okay, I can see that. That's a big business and banking area. Chicago, well, America's second city, so sure, I would expect to have a lot of data centers. Atlanta, apparently that's a growing hub. And I'm not sure what the connectivity advantages are, but that was what was listed. Washington, D.C., all right, so that's kind of near Northern Virginia. New York, of course. And then Miami, believe it or not, which really surprised me because it's not centrally located in the country. Also, with the hurricanes and sea level rise and stuff, seems like a risky place to put those, but apparently it's popular. And then LA, because that's a big city. All right. So, what about Denver as a center for data centers? Well, there's quite a few advantages. I mean, we're centrally located, um, cool climate, so you get free cooling for a significant portion of the year. Low risk of natural disasters, and this is one why a lot of people from the hurricane and earthquake regions of the country are considering, and the flood regions are considering coming to Colorado and the Rocky Mountain area. Apparently, we've got a strong fiber optic infrastructure, pretty growing tech ecosystem. Yeah, we got the Denver Tech Center. I could see that. Apparently, pretty cost-effective operations, lower, at least compared to a lot of places, real estate costs, competitive electrical rates. We're probably about middle in the country on that. And then, as I already mentioned, the reduced cooling expenses. And I think we've got a pretty tech and educated workforce here, which wasn't mentioned here, but I think that's one of them. And business-friendly policies, apparently pretty decent tax incentives and regulatory benefits. And then this area's got a renewable energy focus. And hopefully all of us here are contributing and part of that. All right, so what are maybe some of the challenges or considerations? Well, lack of state sales tax exemptions, and then water usage. You do need some water for cooling, and since this is kind of a dry area, we don't have a lot of water, at least compared to some areas. That could be an issue. And then energy costs. But I think if we look at using on-site uh, distributed energy, that's not so much of an issue. So to that point, I guess one more thing here. So here's the U.S. Energy projection for data centers, and it was considered to be kind of flat from 2014 to about 2017 at what is that, maybe 50 terawatt hours per year. And then it started climbing, and now it's expected to really shoot up. And of course, there's uncertainty talking about the future here. This was done, looks like 2023. But if we get up to the 500 terawatt hour range, now that's an order of magnitude higher than it was. So this is really growing, and a lot of environmentalists are concerned about this. They don't want to see that load dumped onto the grid, and I can see that. All right, so powering data centers. Well, obviously they require a lot of electricity. And I think the first reaction is everyone thinks, well, I get electricity from the grid. All right, let's connect it to the grid. Well, I love this quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. For every complicated problem, there's a solution that's simple, direct, understandable, and wrong. And H.L. Mencken, you probably don't remember this, but he did the Scopes monkey trials. He covered that. He was a journalist covering that, and he's got some great quotes out there. But um, I just love that. Simple, direct, understandable, and wrong. So, well, what's wrong with using the grid? Well, it's going to drive construction of new utility plants, as I just pointed out, and it's going to require massive new transmission lines. And some of you have heard places in the country, people have tried to put in new transmission lines, and they just get shot down, or they take decades just about to get approved. So there's some real issues with that. So, what if we could power data centers without the grid? How would we do that? Well, here's the on-site clean energy options. Well, obviously the good old standbys of wind and solar, geothermal, which we haven't seen too much of, but here in the Rockies we've got great geothermal availability, so that's a possibility. And then, in my favorite, which I really think is going to win the day in the end, is geologic hydrogen. Whether it's naturally occurring hydrogen, which you tap into just with wells, or generated out of old petroleum reservoirs with either injecting oxygen, which generates hydrogen, or injecting microbes, which generates hydrogen. All right, so what do these things look like? Well, wind and solar, we all know, have the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, and so they have. I'm calling it a duty cycle. A lot of people call this a capacity factor, which I don't know, as an engineer, that doesn't sound right to me. But so you're going to have battery backup. And I'm here showing iron air batteries because they've got a 30-year life. They're a lot cheaper, and they're bulky, so obviously they're not good for cars. But for utilities, I think we're going to see a lot of that. So that's a possibility. But they have a round trip efficiency of about 50%. You only get back out about half the electricity you put in, unlike a lithium ion battery, which is probably up in the 90s somewhere. All right, so geothermal, how does that work? Well, the geothermal heat below the ground creates steam, which then drives a turbine, which turns a generator, but this requires cooling towers. And it's shown here. You see the steam coming out of the top of this thing, kind of a nuclear plant style, but there's also the style that you see at electric power plants that are like a truncated inverted pyramid, kind of a box. And in the wintertime, you'll see steam coming out of those. But the reason you need that is that for an efficient, it's called the Carnot cycle, Carnot, you need to have the coolest output and the hottest input that you can to create the maximum amount of work. So that can be an issue. That can take some real estate, and we'll talk to that in a minute. So here, I've shown this stuff before, but here is the geothermal potential. And you can see Colorado, Wyoming, and other parts of the West have got great potential for geothermal. All right. So, and there was a Hydrogen Nowcast about this back in 2022, if you want to go look that one up. All right. So, what about hydrogen powering a turbine and a generator in this case? So, obviously, you need to source some kind of a hydrogen well. And I went through and I looked at some of the numbers to this, and I'm going to show the like a cost of all these different schemes here in just a minute. But with a turbine, as I already talked about, with the geothermal, you're going to need cooling towers. There's the other style that I talked about. The generator is probably 90% efficient. The turbine probably 40%. GE Vernova, I think it's called. It now makes a turbine that runs on 100% hydrogen, so it is more or less an off-the-shelf item. And so that's one possibility of doing it that way. But okay, well, obviously the other is fuel cells. So fuel cells, I'm using the number 70% efficiency, somewhere in that ballpark probably right now. That 30% of waste is going to be heat, and so you're going to need cooling towers for these as well. But of course, the data center is going to need cooling for the computers and things that are running in that as well. So one of the bigger features, I think, of these farms, if you want to call it that, is going to be quite a bit of cooling. And that's where the water gets consumed, because you typically, through evaporative cooling, would inject water into these radiators, I guess you could call them, to enhance the cooling, especially in the summertime. So I've shown this before, but here's our Rocky Mountain area, the natural hydrogen prospectivity, as it's called. And I mentioned this before, but again, this map was done by the U.S. Geological Survey, and it's based on about 5 different databases that have been collected over the decades, century even, of what we know about the geology and the possibility of it supporting hydrogen generation underground. And you can see Denver, Cheyenne area, that quadrant of Colorado and well up into Wyoming and Nebraska, apparently has just incredible potential for hydrogen. And I'll point out also down in New Mexico, where you see the crossroads there just below Santa Fe. That crossroads is I-25, I-40. That's where Albuquerque is. Pretty good possibility of natural hydrogen there too. So that's important, because why go generate hydrogen somewhere off in the boonies and have to ship it when you could generate it right close to a population center where it could be used? All right, you guys have all seen this many times, but just for a review, or if you maybe are new to the meetings and haven't seen this, method one there is basically injecting microbes down into a hydrogen or a petroleum reservoir. Petroleum reservoir that munches on the hydrocarbons along with some of the water and other things and releases hydrogen. And then you'd bring nothing but hydrogen out of the well and through some kind of a filter. And this really differs from pulling natural gas out of a well and using steam methane reforming to create hydrogen for 2 reasons. First of all, you never pull any of the carbon out of the ground, so you don't have methane leaks and other things. And then you also don't have to sequester the carbon that's created in the steam methane reforming process. So that's why this would be considered clean. Now, method 2, very similar. You inject oxygen. It reacts with the petroleum and water, and it gets hot and generates hydrogen. And again, only hydrogen is brought out of the well. So, of course, the problem with these two, if you had an on-site, like on a campus for a data center, is eventually you would deplete these wells. Whereas for natural hydrogen, a lot of those processes are ongoing and sustainable. Now, it may be a trick to know how sustainable and how long they'll be ongoing, but there is at least that possibility. So for those last two techniques, here's just an example of the petroleum wells just in Colorado that are available. And the blue are abandoned wells. So these are a liability on somebody's book somewhere. A lot of these also need to be remediated and plugged. So this could be a possible use of those old wells. All right, so let's summarize here. Well, first of all, a disclaimer. I'm going to show you some costs here in a minute, but they're very, very rough. I just wanted to try to get an idea of where some of these things stand, and they're based on a lot of assumptions. I've got the data from internet searches, which I just said with with AI, I'm less confident about some of the data I'm finding on the internet anymore. A good example, I just recently tried to find out. How many BTUs in a kilogram of hydrogen, and it gave me BTUs per pound, but it told me they were kilograms. And I at first thought I did it wrong, and I did more of a look. I went to actually find a table, and sure enough, it's telling me it's BTUs per kilogram. It was actually BTUs per pound. So be careful with your internet searches. They seem to be becoming less reliable in my experience. So these costs I'm going to give you are not really based on any detailed system diagrams. I looked at it at a very rough level, and I didn't include any land costs. However, I think this is useful for us to just try to get an idea with what it would take to run a data center off of um, distributed energy. So, all right, here's a summary here. Well, I have these sorted by the cost per megawatt hour. And for a turbine, even though the turbine's pretty expensive and you need a fair amount of land and cooling, I'm coming up with something like $27 per kilowatt hour or per megawatt hour. And for comparison, if you go to Xcel and buy energy from them, this is based on their schedule SG, and I'm going to show you how that's built up. That's 78. So this is almost a third of that. So, all right, maybe I'm off by something, but still, I think it gives us an idea that this could be in the realm of possibility. Fuel cell, and I even use these numbers get really huge, by the way. This is based on 100 megawatt hours. And you start looking at hundreds of millions of dollars just in the fuel cells. But still, even with that, and assuming a 30-year amortization payback, it's still probably half the cost of XL's rates. Geothermal, it's a little bit more. And again, I just went to the internet and just pulled what is a megawatt hour of geothermal costing these days. And these are the numbers I got for geothermal, wind, and solar. And the wind and solar, of course, are going to include the battery backup. And by the way, that land area there's what is it, 640 acres per square mile. So 4,412 acres for wind. Well, that's 6.9 square miles. And so to give you an idea of the amount of land wind and solar would take. All right, so XL Schedule SG, I haven't refreshed this in maybe about a year, but the last that I looked, here was the breakdown. And this really kind of opens your eyes a little bit because just the energy, the kilowatt or megawatt hour charge, it only makes up about 55% of that. The other is for something called demand charge, and that's how the utility recovers their cost to put in the power lines and the transformers and other things. Also, there's some things called non-base rate adjustment and service rate adjustment. Here, they're recovering money that they've been allowed to do by the Public Utility Commission for maybe a solar farm they did somewhere or a hydro pumping station or something. And so these things get peanut buttered in. So the point is, if you said, okay, well, forget Xcel's energy. I've got a guy over here. He's putting in a wind farm or something. He's going to sell me the electricity at only a penny a kilowatt hour or something. Well, if you put it on the grid, you're still going to get hit with some of these rates. Now, they may scale. I don't know. We'd have to actually get a quote. But so I can see, John, I'm John Cornish. I'm going to just put you on the spot a little bit. I don't know if you have, and maybe you don't, but if you have any comments on any of this, if you think it's off base or bunk or yeah, you're right on the money, or what do you think?
I'm only concerned about I think it was an NREL analysis or who was it said Colorado and Wyoming and Utah are good spots. I think Kansas and Nebraska are the hot spots right now for hydrogen in the ground.
Well, they are. And the a lot of the exploration has been going on in that area called Nemaha, which is kind of pronounced like Omaha area. That's where Xterra has just hit hydrogen. And the reason everybody's starting there is because they think that's the most likely. And what they're probably going to have to do with that hydrogen is turn it into ammonia because you're not going to ship it from way out there to Denver, or Chicago, or anywhere else. But yeah, those are the hot spots right now. But like I say, when you look at that prospectivity map, that blue map I was showing,
Yeah.
there's a lot of great places for it. And so I'm crossing my fingers, and I'm going to talk to the folks down in Houston in September and see if we can interest some of them in doing something up here, and we'll try to help them find a way to use it.
Yeah, I put the Hytera release about the McCoy field in the chat there.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
It's
Yeah, I
brand new.
assume a number of people
I
have
just
seen that because it's been on a lot of the
love your
news.
optimism, and I think it's terrific.
Oh yeah, and especially when you look at the price of all this. I don't think well, and I did a podcast on it. I really don't think that electrolysis could ever compete with it, no matter how cheap the hardware got and how cheap the electricity got. So, all right, let's see. What else did I have? Well, just to kind of summarize, um, maybe hydrogen wells are the lowest cost way to power a data center, either using natural hydrogen or the old oil reservoirs. Issues, of course, you've got to strike geologic hydrogen. So there's some risk there. Not every well is going to be, you may hit hydrogen at every well, but it might be a small amount and it may not um, last. It may just be a pocket that goes away once you tap into it. So the useful life is an issue. Benefits, well, avoids the pushback from the public over new power stations and new transmission lines. And then also, if some data center went in and they put in a hydrogen well, that would help start the market. And that could be a source of hydrogen that could be available for other uses like transportation, because transportation alone can't give you the return on your investment, at least not early days. That's something like a data center could do. So that's the message I'm always out there with is, hey, we've got to find a big user of hydrogen to drive a big producer of hydrogen. And then that helps get the market started and creates a good source for everybody. All right, so I paused a little, but I'd be curious if anybody's got a little more insight to this, or comments, or just questions, or anything. We got plenty of time, so if you want to talk about it a little bit, happy to do that. And I know it's hard on a Zoom forum. Just jump in and
Brian,
yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Bill here. Two things. On-site hydrogen wells implies that the data center people locate where there is such a well or is likely to be one. That may or may not be convenient for them. Otherwise, you have to bring the hydrogen to the site that has been chosen from the nearest hydrogen wells. That's going to require some kind of transmission, more likely pipelines in the ground. Have you or others been tracking the progress of the high blend DOE project conducted by Sandia, NREL, and I think it's a couple of other labs trying to find line pipe that will be highly resistant to hydrogen embrittlement? The second point is the ideal source for data centers in the Colorado area, where you do have a thinner crust and therefore better, lower cost access to deep hot dry rock geothermal, would be that source. You put the deep hot dry rock geothermal well, as we learn how to bore deeper, cheaper to do that, right where your data center is or will be. And then it's just a matter of bringing that heat to the surface, generating electricity directly, never mind hydrogen,
Yeah.
at either in Rankine turbine plants, either steam or organic. That's
Yeah.
all. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, Bill, maybe I'll take your points in reverse order. So, absolutely, I think geothermal is going to be a very, very strong source of electricity in the future. I really think someday we'll look back and we'll say, wind and solar were kind of niches. I think solar is great on homes and buildings as a small distributed source. I think wind makes a lot of sense along the coast or in the Midwest where there's a ton of wind and it's blowing almost all the time. I think we'll continue to see utility scale wind. Um, don't know if geothermal would be cheaper than geologic hydrogen, and maybe it's all of the above. I think you got good points there. I have not been tracking high blend. Bill, I did a podcast with uh, H2 Clipper, and they have a pipe design which is triaxial. And the center pipe carries the hydrogen. Then you have a slightly larger pipe outside of that that's got an inert gas like nitrogen to collect anything that leaks. And then those two could be put in the ground just like that as coaxial. But if you want to put it into an existing pipeline, you just pull that through. Um, so now it becomes triaxial. So you don't have to worry about embrittlement or leaky pipes or whatever. So I think pipelines are absolutely going to make sense. Will we run a big sprawling grid like we have with natural gas? Probably not. But certainly for point to point, like if you had a well or something like that, and you wanted to get the hydrogen just a few miles, point to point pipelines could definitely make sense. Um, Also for just energy transmission, and Bill, you pointed this out before, instead of electric transmission line, you put in a large hydrogen pipeline. It's now fairly immune from tampering and terrorism, unlike a tower that's got wires on it. And also, you can vary the pressure in there so it becomes a kind of de facto storage. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see where these things go. The point I was trying to make here is I ran the numbers because I was curious to see how they stacked up. And geohydrogen looks awfully attractive. Um, whether or not when you put together a real system, this works out. Maybe it flips a little bit. Maybe geothermal is the cheapest of all of them. I could see that in some cases. So, yeah, I think you got great points here, Bill.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Bill, you're up in Juneau, aren't you?
I am now. Yes, that's where I
How did you
live.
make out with the floods from that what was it, a glacier that kind of dammed up and burst?
That's right. It was very localized to people who live along the Mendenhall River, which drains Mendenhall Lake, which receives the outburst flood from the glacier itself from a little side reservoir along the side called Suicide Basin. So we were far from it, only a few hundred, well, probably this time 50 or 100 houses were even affected.
Oh,
Very,
well,
very expensive dam has been put in place along the riverbank to keep the water out of most
mm,
of the houses. So we were untouched. We're at 200 feet elevation, and that was close to sea level.
yeah. Of course, if part of the city gets swept away, it still impacts you. But so was this a case of dodge the bullet this year, but what about next year kind of thing?
We expect it to continue year
Yeah.
by year. We don't know if it'll get worse. This year's was the biggest ever, slightly larger than last year's. We don't know. Of course, it's climate change related.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose in the long run, that glacier is going to be gone and it'll just drain all year. But um, not a good outcome in any case. But thanks, Bill. I just thought about that when I saw that I think they had talked about possibly evacuating Juneau at one point, and so
No, only evacuating a very few people, a few
okay,
hundred people.
good. All right, glad to hear it. All right, other folks with comments or questions or anything on this whole idea of the data centers and powering these things?
Let me jump in with a question, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Hi, Michael Zabella here, calling in from Boston, other end of the country, of the continent. Want to know if there have been any early successes in striking for geologic hydrogen that anybody knows about on the call.
Well, as a matter of fact, the first well in North America was drilled in Nebraska, and it was drilled by a guy I know really well. I've met him a number of times in person, Vyacheslav Zagonik. And back in Vyacheslav actually is Ukrainian, and he lives in Paris now. He had a company that was based in Denver and Paris. And he drilled the first well in North America, in Nebraska, and they hit hydrogen. I don't think he's ever released the data on how much or what the flow rate or anything was. And then there's been a bunch of prospecting. We mentioned earlier this company called Hytera, Hyterra, and they're funded by Fortescue, and they are prospecting and drilling up in an area called the Nemaha area, northeast Nebraska. And they've hit the first two wells. I mean, they hit a hydrogen and it was pretty good concentration. I have not heard them talk about the flow rates or if they know how much is there or if it's sustainable. In other words, a lot of the processes that create hydrogen underground are nuclear that are combining with water and iron-rich rock, and it's an ongoing process. So they will continue to generate it. However, what you first tap into may be a big pocket that was generated over a long period of time, and you get a lot out of it initially, but then you discover that, oh, it dribbles off to a very small amount of replenishment. So there's all kinds of issues there, and I don't know how much they can tell that in advance. So there is some risk. I don't think anybody expects that these are a situation where you sink a well, you pull a little bit of hydrogen out, and you're done. I think they're going to try to go after replenishing or recycling or sustainable type of sources. But anyway, those are just the start, and they found hydrogen, a lot of it in France. They found it in Australia. Um, there's what was the country? I want to say Namibia, but I may be wrong on that. They're finding it in a number of places. And by the way, interesting side note, and Vyacheslav covers this in his 2020 paper. There's a site in Turkey that is considered to be the source of fire for the first Olympic torch. That's hydrogen, and it's been running for I don't know how long, as far as back as anybody knows. That's been leaking hydrogen. It caught fire. It's continuing to burn. So, um, say that. And then one more thing, which everybody on this call has probably heard before, and that is that, okay, why are we just now hearing about this? Well, the very good reason is that scientists always believed that hydrogen was light, it was volatile, it was consumed by microbes. You'd never find it in nature. So they weren't looking for it. And to make matters worse, the gas chromatographs that they were using used hydrogen as a carrier gas. So they always, if they were looking for methane or helium or whatever, they always zeroed out the hydrogen. So not only were they not looking for it, if it was there, they actually were erasing the evidence of that. And so the Russians got involved and they said, well, wait a minute, we're finding this stuff naturally. Something's wrong with this picture. And that's where Vyacheslav, since he's Ukrainian, he speaks Russian, he can interpret these papers and everything, got involved. So that's I think, really fascinating story behind why this is such a new thing. And it may be just about everywhere under our feet.
Fascinating. Sounds really exciting.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, a lot of these wells only take a simple well bore. Some may require some fracturing of the rock or development and other things that's going to cost more. But if it's a simple well bore, we're talking about pretty darn cheap. A hole in the ground and a compressor. I'm trivializing, of course, but at any rate. All right. Still have time if anybody else has got thoughts or questions. All right. Well, I'll continue. I don't have anything of remaining of real substance here. I'd like to show the podcast and what's going on out there. We continue to have a lot of listeners and a lot of interest in that. And then CHN membership. If you feel so moved to try to help and support what we're doing, you can make a tax deductible donation, $50 a year as an individual or $200 as a startup. And then if you're a corporation and you'd like to also be a member of the Colorado Clean Tech, they were Colorado Clean Tech Industries Association or CCIA. They've now just changed their name to Colorado Clean Tech. But that $1,000 is a starting point on that, but that gives you membership in both CCIA or Colorado Clean Tech and CHN if that's of interest. So would love to have a few more contributions. Haven't had a huge amount of those rolling in, but if you'd like to, just go to the website, and I'll show you that page here. If you go to the member and hover your mouse, then the red join will pop up at the top. And if you want to just donate as an individual um, or a startup or corporation, those two blue buttons will do it. And I believe this donate button still isn't working, so I apologize. I need to get after Colorado Clean Tech, help me get that set up. But again, participation is always open to everybody at no charge, so don't feel any obligation to contribute. But if you want to try to help the cause a little bit and kind of keep us going, so we can sponsor some events and other things like that, that would be great. Then the very last thing here is, and I've shown this, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 of our last meetings, but SARAD, who's putting on the Mountain Hydrogen Retreat, has quite an extensive database. If you're interested in that, I would suggest on the bottom left there that executive summary, the tiny URL. Go to that, see if you're interested in that. If you want this report, and you have to pay for it, of course, but anything that you pay will be 15% is going to be donated back to CHN if you use this discount code CHN25. All right, that is all I had. So, kind of a short meeting. Next month, I promise we're going to have a good full meeting of some really meaty content and so forth. But since we have a few more minutes, I know it's hard on Zoom, but if any discussion or some other things people want to bring up or questions on anything.
Brian, the conference I referred to at the beginning of the meeting is September 30 through October 1st. It's called Green Hydrogen Seattle or Green H2
Okay.
Seattle.
Oh, okay. I'll make a note of that. Maybe, well, let's see. Yeah, that's in time for our next meeting if we want to let people know, and I can put it in the um, newsletter as well. So it's just called Green Hydrogen Seattle.
Yep. Keynote speaker is Chris Green, who's the president of the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub.
Ah, okay. All right, good. Well, check that out. That's probably going to be a bridge too far for me to go to. I got a real jam-packed schedule of travel with some personal stuff and this Houston thing and a wedding I got to travel to, and so I may not be able to do that. Plus, I'll be in Boulder for that event, but um, I'll at least let other folks know about it. So thanks, Bill.
I'm glad you're popular.
I don't know about that, but all right. Well, a little bit of a short meeting. Like I say, we're going to have a lot more meat to talk about next time. Still have a couple minutes, though, if anybody wants to bring anything up. Everybody's ready to go to dinner. All right. Well, with that, we will adjourn. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in September.